We are pleased to confer the Honorary Doctor of Laws degree today. Dr. Jennifer Wallinga, will you please present the honorary degree candidate, Ms. Anna Maria Tremonti.
Anna Maria Tremonti is a respected and award-winning CBC television and radio journalist. For decades, Ms. Tremonti has been a beacon of truth-telling and truth-seeking. Her work has provided a public space in which all Canadians are invited to participate. In the communications field, she's our rock star. Mick Jagger, Anna Maria. Ms. Tremonti spent 19 years with CBC television, including as host of CBC's investigative show, The Fifth Estate. She returned to radio in 2002 to launch what would become one of Canada's most listened to radio programs, The Current. The Current is a national institution. It's deeply committed to the enlightenment of its listeners. Under Ms. Tremonti's direction, it has won numerous awards, including for outstanding human rights reporting from Amnesty International Canada. She's invited audiences to listen in on remarkable interviews with Canadians such as Syrian-born Meher Arar, who was held as a political prisoner in Syria, and Nobel Peace Prize laureate Malala Yousafzai, who was shot by a Taliban gunman for advocating for girls' education. Amid the noise and distractions of the news cycle, Ms. Tremonti doesn't shy away from nuance and complexity, but rather investigates why such complexity exists. Her brand of journalism is premised on a measured approach to truth-seeking that is essential in our increasingly polarized political and social context. Ms. Tremonti's career demonstrates her commitment to journalism and how she encourages knowledge sharing, public dialogue, and social transformation. Fellow journalists have lauded her willingness to seek out stories that affect how we live as human beings, her fearlessness as an interviewer, and her focus. It's no overstatement to say that she's become a Canadian institution herself. A record of success in one medium is an achievement, in two, a rare feat. We are delighted to add to Ms. Tremonti's many awards and accolades, including 2 other honorary degrees, 2 Gemini Awards, and an Outstanding Achievement Award from Women in Film and Television, Toronto. While at The Current, she also won the Canadian Journalism Foundation's Excellence in Journalism Award. For her commitment to supporting the fundamental principles of democracy and social justice through balanced, fair, and nuanced reporting, it is my honor to present Anna Maria Tremonti for the degree Doctor of Laws, honoris causa.
Yeah. Ms. Tremonti, by virtue of the authority vested in me by the Royal Roads University Act and in accordance with the recommendation of the Board of Governors of Royal Roads University, I confer upon you the degree of Doctor of Laws, honoris causa, with all the rights, privileges, and honors here and elsewhere thereto appertaining. Ms. Tremonti will now be hooded by Dr. Steve Grundy, Vice President, Academic and Provo. President Alan Cahoon will now present Dr. Tremonti with her degree.
And you don't have to take it with you.
It is with great pleasure that I now call upon Dr. Tremonti, yes, I said Dr. Tremonti, to deliver the convocation address.
Good afternoon. You know, I wanted to go to law school once. This is even better. I'm going to drop my water. Hereditary Chief Thomas, Chancellor Burney, President and Vice Chancellor Cahoon, members of the Board of Governors, faculty members, family and friends who've supported the students, and most importantly, graduates who are here today. This is an honor, and it's a real thrill for me to be with you here today. And I'm really excited for you because coming to this very special university, you have made a proactive decision about your own future. You are here to upgrade skills and knowledge that you already have, or to shift focus on what you're doing, or to change directions entirely. And by doing all of that, you made a decision to look at your future and shape your own future. And your path going forward is yours to determine, and that's really exciting. And as I look at the list of departments and studies that define your time here, I'm really hopeful for you as well. Because I look at all you've been working on: strategic global communications, international and intercultural communications, learning and technology, conflict analysis and management, disaster and emergency management, environmental practice, sustainable community development. All of these things on which you have spent so many hours and worked so hard are what we as journalists cover. Those are the areas that are part of rapid change and adapting ideas that are shaping our world, and you are part of it. And that's really important because you will make decisions that shape a lot of that going forward. Now, I've been called a truth teller here today, or a truth seeker. And sometimes I think I'm caught in the pages of that children's tale, you know, The Emperor's New Clothes, where everybody knows what they're seeing, but nobody wants to say. Because we're living in very polarizing times. And we talk about truth, and there can be many truths, and there can be realities, and some truths are more pertinent than others, and there are different perspectives. You know this story, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson are camping. And in the middle of the night, Holmes wakes Watson up. "Watson, wake up. Look up. What do you see?" And Watson says, "I see a million stars. I see the universe unfolding." And he says, "No, Watson, someone stole the tent." Both truths, one more pertinent. We are in polarizing times, politically polarizing and socially divisive. And at no time in our history have we been so technologically enabled when it comes to information. And yet, what do we do as a society with so much of that information? We ignore it. We push it away because it represents an uncomfortable truth, or because by knowing it we have to answer to it, or we have to answer for it, or because it doesn't fit the narrative that we want it to fit. But it doesn't go away, and it is our job as journalists to sort through it and find truths and to offer them up anyway, in the hope that true information and informed truth will prevail, that we'll talk about it, that we'll understand it, and that we'll move forward together. And that's where you come in. And that's where you and I come in together, because the more we talk about what is real in all its complexity, the more we expose the truth, and the more we foster understanding, and the more we can tackle the polarization and bring it back to a level where we can actually talk to each other. You know, every day I turn on the microphone and try to tackle some issues about truth. And you may think I talk for a living, but in reality, what I do is I listen for a living. I ask questions so that I can hear what people are thinking. I listen for their reasoning and their emotion. I listen for their silences. Because everything they say and everything they don't say teaches me something. And it teaches us all something. The more we listen, the more we can think. And hopefully, the more we can find common ground. You know, when I first started covering conflict, I got a lesson in how different views of truth can be deadly. I was in the city of Mostar in Bosnia-Herzegovina. I was in part of it anyway. And it was a place where you could not get a more stark example of a polarized population. You had Serbs on one side, Croatians on the other, and in the middle you had the Bosnians. And you couldn't reach the middle. The other two surrounded on either side. There was an ancient bridge, it was bombed out. Other bridges were reduced just to the skeletal steel parts of the bridge. Buildings were bombed out or they were empty. People were huddled together living in basements of high-rise apartments because that was the only place to be safe. And all you had to do was look to see how vicious the fighting was. And we would go to the front line area controlled by the Croatians. We were trying to get through the front line into the middle, and we could only get so far every day, and we got pushed back. And when we were at the front line area, we went to where they had the sniper positions on the Croatian side, where they would shoot across the river, where they would shoot to kill. But the day we were there were 3 men, a Serb, a Croat, and a Bosnian, all together, fighting together on that side, a little older, and they were sitting there playing cards, all 3 of them. And they told me that when there was a lull in the shooting at night, they would shout across the river at the guys who were shooting at them, and they'd ask about their neighbors. They'd literally say, hey, how's so-and-so? What about that street? What's going on? What's his name? Are they still there? Are they okay? It wasn't the image that I had of fighting sides, but it was the truth about those people who were fighting. And on the road in, we'd go 1, 2, 3 checkpoints, and we'd always get stopped at the 3rd one and turned away. And so finally we asked the UN to take us in, and the UN had an armored vehicle that was kind of like a little cube van, and there was a retired British general bringing in aid, and he agreed to take me and my team inside in that van with no windows so that nobody would see we were getting in past the checkpoint. And he told us if the vehicle stops, there's a ditch on the left side, you might have to run into the ditch because there might be shooting. So the vehicle stops, and the door opens a crack, and we think, uh-oh, here's trouble. And the door opens a little more. And the guys at the checkpoint start pushing in packages. Packages wrapped in brown paper with addresses on them for us to take into the other side. They were sending care packages for their neighbors. And I was so struck by that. I was struck by the humanity in the midst of the war. And it taught me, it reminded me that not everyone who fights a war wants to fight a war. That people who care about each other can end up on opposite sides. So if friends can turn into enemies, then enemies can become friends. And if we listen, we might hear something other than shooting and shouting. So fast forward to another war. War also teaches us just how valuable information is and how there is such a hunger for truth that people will risk their lives to share it, to get it out, to let other people know. I met a man on the radio named Omar Mohammed. He's in his early 30s. He was teaching history at a university in Iraq, in Mosul, when ISIS took over his city. And he watched in disbelief at what they did to people, how they controlled people. And he was confronted one day by one of his own students who had joined ISIS. Omar Mohammed did not join. He didn't actively fight. He did something else. He started gathering information. He had a friend who was a doctor, so he borrowed his scrubs and he went to the hospital and he wandered around and he talked to patients about what they were seeing and what was happening to them. He got in his car and pretended to be a taxi driver, and he drove around and he picked people up and he talked to them and he learned more. And he'd go home and he'd blog about it. He'd upload these stories and he'd put them out to the world, and he called himself Mosul I. And he said, my city was being destroyed and I had to document what was happening. And he did that at great risk to himself. ISIS knew he was out there doing it, but they didn't know where he was. And he said, I knew they didn't know where I was because they kept threatening to kill me online. And he says, I knew if they really knew where I was, they would have knocked on my door. For more than 2 years, he did this. And he brought those stories to the rest of us. And he risked his life because he said, my city matters. I was part of an amazing ancient city, and it was being destroyed, and I couldn't just say nothing. I had to let everyone know. Mo Salai was a truth teller. He was a truth seeker. He eventually got out, and a few months after we learned his name, he and I had a conversation. He went somewhere where he could talk to me. We could not say where we were reaching him because his life was still in danger, but we could talk about what he saw. And he said some days he would see so many terrible things, he'd go home and he'd play music, and he'd play it really, really loud, which was against what the people controlling the city wanted. They didn't want it to hear any music. And he'd play symphony music, and he played a theme song from Schindler's List, as loud as he could play it. And he would just sit there and listen. And I said, why would you, an Arab man in Mosul, play the theme song to a movie about the Jews and the Holocaust? And he said, because I saw parallels. And I wanted to think about all of that. And I wanted to hear that music because that music spoke to me. He saw a parallel in the destruction and the victimization, and he wanted people to know. And we talked about why he did this. Why does a young man risk everything just so we can know the truth? And you saw this many times in Syria. You saw young people who couldn't get out, who started uploading pictures and stories at great risk to themselves because they thought it was important that those of us in much more comfortable places understood the pain that they were going through. And he risked his life to do that because it mattered so much. Finding truth, telling truth, sharing the truth, the desire to be told the truth is worth a lot. It's worth risking your life. And we get there. We get to the point where we understand truth by asking and listening and talking and sharing. And if we don't do that, we lose a lot. I just want you to think about that as you celebrate your great accomplishments today, as you take what you have learned here into a wider world. Remember to demand the truth from those of us in the media, from those with power and influence, and demand the truth from yourself as well. And please keep talking to each other when everyone else is shouting. Thank you so much for honoring me here today, and congratulations to all of you.